Okay, continuing in the Memches Devarim, the 48 ways. The next one is called V'loi Megis Liboi B'Talmudai. A person is not Megis Leiv, they are not haughty in their heart over their learning. So the Mefarshim say, Kol HaMisyahir, anybody who is haughty through their learning, Chachmasa Mistalekes Mimenu. Their chachma, their wisdom, is going to disappear from them. If a person learns and learns and learns, and they end up becoming an arrogant person as a result of the Torah knowledge that they have, so the Torah will end up flying away. Who do we learn this out from? We learn out from Hillel, the great Hillel Zakin. He was the most humble of all people. Nevertheless, he was punished one time, because Pamachas, one time he expressed a little bit of arrogance and haughtiness in his Torah, and as a result, Hillel ended up losing a lot of his wisdom at that moment. So therefore, say Chazal, a person should see in the Torah that they learn to keep themselves humble. So they say like this, what's the reason? The more wisdom that a person attains in the learning, Yargish Yoisa, they begin to feel even more, how much wisdom they're actually lacking. The more I learn, the more I know how much I don't know. And he says, the more intellect, the more knowledge that you increase, so you begin to see how great wisdom really is. The deeper you get into the wisdom of the Torah, the more you begin to understand it, the more you're able to see just how much Torah there really is, how deep it truly is. And therefore, as a result of you recognizing the greatness of Torah, you begin to get you open up, you begin to see an insight into just how much Torah there is. So what does a person have to be haughty about? As much as you know that you're only touching the tip of the iceberg. As many Blat Gemaras you've learned, as many Siyum have you made, as many Mishnayos as you learned, as much as you said over a Pshat in a Pasuk, whatever Pshat we said over in the Pasuk, remember we just had a few Shabbosim ago, the Hachaim said 42 Pshatim in one Pasuk. So you said a nice Pshat in a Pasuk, very good. Did you say 42 mystical Pshatim, 42 mystical ideas, the way the Hachaim did? And the Hachaim would say himself, I'm a nothing compared to what they were in the previous generations. So the more that you learn, the more you understand how deep the wisdom of the Torah is, the more you realize how much there is for a person to be able to learn and to know and to plumb those depths. And therefore, how could a person ever really be someone that is haughty in their learning? The Midrash Shmuel writes, yesterday we spoke about this idea of misrachik min hakavod, running away from honor. But this one is not to be haughty. Besides that, you're running away from honor. Even in your heart, there's not 1 ounce of haughtiness for the learning that you have accomplished. You always will look at yourself as the tiniest of all of the Chachamim, the sages, and because of that, you'll work harder and harder in your learning. If a person thinks to themselves, there's so much more that I have to learn, there's so much more Torah that is out there. Sometimes you go to a shiur of like one of these fascinating Talmidei Chachamim, and you hear this person is holding in a different world, in a different realm of Torah. There's so much that's there, so much. It makes you realize how much more a person could work, how much harder we could invest. Good, if you put in the time and you put in the effort, feel good about yourself. Yet don't let yourself come to the level of haughtiness, because that itself is not going to accomplish much at all. The next one is Ve'enai samech bahira. A person does not rejoice, he's not happy with the fact that he has to give halachic psakim and answers. Says the Tiferes Yisrael, Einai samech she'egila. He's not happy when the shaila, when the halachic question comes to his doorstep. The yirei shema einai kedayla, because he thinks to himself, maybe I'm not worthy of answering such a question. Maybe I don't have enough wisdom. The shema yikashaba, maybe I'll make a mistake. Miroiv dakusa, because it's such a as they say in halacha, it's like splitting hairs sometimes. In order to be able to understand exactly what is the shaila, I had a very interesting two shailas yesterday, and I called a paisik, and he went back and forth, and he said, you know what? I don't know the answer. He said, I feel like I'm too young to answer such a question. He said, you better have call Rabbi Bess, or I'll give you a name of a paisik in New York, call them instead. So I called Rabbi Bess. In less than 2 seconds, he answered Bush just like that. Just like that. I asked the question, as I'm asking the question, he's already asking a question back, and boom, he answers the question just like that. So a person should be concerned that maybe, like this the first Rav that I called, maybe perhaps they're not worthy of answering the question because it's so darkus, it's so narrow sometimes, the question that is there. You have to make sure that you know what you're talking about. So he writes like this, when a person is asked to paskin, to give a halachic, a rendering, he doesn't rejoice, like we said before. He's concerned that maybe he's going to make a mistake. There's a famous story with the Brisker Rav, when he became the Rav in the town of Brisk. That's why he's the Brisker Rav. So he was known already to be one of the Gedolei Adur, one of the great leaders of the generation. And he was known to be expert in halacha as well. Not only was he an expert in all the wisdom of Shas, Bavli, Shalmi, everything you could imagine, but he was also very big in halacha. So they came on the first day of his tenure as the Rav of the city with a shaila about something in a chicken, if it was kosher, it wasn't kosher, and they wanted him to paskin the halacha, is it kosher or treif? And he looks at the chicken, and he looks at the shaila, and he says, I don't know. What? The Brisker Rav doesn't know? He said, I don't know. And the town went crazy. We brought this Rav in, they said he's the Gadol Ador, he knows everything. He says, I don't know? How could it be? He doesn't know? So it created a tremendous stir in town. They ended up going to one of the other paiskim over there who ended up saying what it was, kosher treif. And they came back to the Brisker Rav. They were very angry. They were very upset. How could it be that we bring you to be the Rav of our town and you can't paskin halacha? So he said, I'll tell you the truth. I looked at the chicken. I knew right away it's kosher, not treif. He says, but I know as a paisik, the hardest thing in the world is to say, I don't know. And I know once in a while there's going to come a case where it's so difficult to know what the halacha is, I in fact might not know what the halacha is. So I had to get it out of the way right now and say, I don't know, in order that when it would come to that time that I really won't know, I won't be embarrassed to say that I don't know. One of the great paiskim of America was Rav Belsky, Zecher Tzadik Livracha. He was a giant of a person. He was a disciple of Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, who himself was a gigantic paisik. And he was one of the Rosh Yeshivas of Torah Vidas in New York. And he was learning, halacha, becoming an expert. But he was never paskening shaylas, means he never gave his halachic opinion in anything. One day after davening, somebody came to Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, who was the Rebbe of Rav Belsky. And he asked Rav Yaakov a shayla, a question in halacha. So he said, don't ask me, go ask Rav Belsky. So the man comes walking over to Rav Belsky and he says, I just asked Rav Yaakov, who was one of the Gedolei Ador, a shayla. He told me I should come and I should ask you. You know the answer. So Rav Belsky said that up until that point in his life, he was very shy about answering the questions of halacha. He was very unsure if he had enough wisdom under his belt to be able to answer the right question. He said once that he heard that Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky sent somebody over to him to answer a shayla, he realized that his Rebbe was giving him the stamp of approval that you could answer shaylas, you're going to be okay. So this is what it says over here. We're not looking, a person's not looking to give his psak halacha. If he has to, he has no choice. But since there's always a little bit of a trepidation that maybe he's making the wrong decision, he has to be careful. I'll leave you with just one last story. Rav Moshe Feinstein, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, he once was learning a Gemara with somebody, and as the man is reading the Gemara, Moshe says, no, that's not what it says in the Gemara. And the man says, no, that's what it says. And he starts reading the line in the Gemara again. And Moshe says, that can't be the line in the Gemara. That's not what the Gemara says. So the man shows Moshe the Gemara and he says, no, look, it says these words. So Moshe, suddenly his face like turns white. And he's sitting at the table, he doesn't understand. And he looks very, very concerned. He gets up and he goes to his bookshelf and he pulls his Gemara off the shelf and he opens up to the page and he looks. Whew, okay. Baruch Hashem. And he shows the man that in his Gemara, there's one word that is different than the other print. He had a different print. There's one word that is different. It doesn't change really the meaning, per se, of the Gemara, but there was one word that was different in the print that he had. So the man said, Rabbi, okay, so it's one word is different. I mean, your face turned white. You look like you're going to have a breakdown because one word is different. What's the matter? He said, I've written thousands of tshuvas of halachic answers. He said, I rarely ever look inside the sources that I'm quoting when I write my tshuvas, when I write my responsa. I'm doing everything by memory. And that means that I'm relying upon my memory, that I know everything I'm talking about. That's why I'm not looking at all the books. You brought me a Gemara, and you show me the Gemara, and it's not the Gemara that I remember it being. I remember one word different. At that moment, I said to myself, if I couldn't get that word right, maybe all of the other tshuvas, the 1,000 halachic responses that I wrote, maybe they're all wrong. And that's why I turned my face white. But then I see in my Gemara, it says the word that I remembered. And Baruch Hashem, that means I remember that. I remember all the other svarim as well. Everything is okay. But even Rabbi Moshe was not megas libay b'hayra. He didn't have a haughty heart over his learning. And therefore, we shouldn't have haughty hearts because there's so much more Torah that we have to learn.